Good morning, everyone. My name is José Pio Borges. I'm the chairman of the Board of Trustees of the Brazilian Center for International Relations, CEBRI. It is a great pleasure to welcome you to the event Economic and Political Realignments, the European Contributions. This panel marks the opening of a series of activities between CEBRI and the European Union delegation in Brazil. We are honored to develop together a project dedicated to the European contribution to multilateralism, focused on the perspectives to Brazil. Since CEBRI's foundation in 1998, the relationship between Brazil and Europe has been a core subject of our activities. Our historical bonds have helped to shape our diplomatic stance on global issues, and European countries are among Brazil's most important strategic partners. It extends from trade to culture, investments, and social ties. Multilateralism has been a milestone of Brazil's international globally. Brazil has always favored multilateralism, both regionally and globally. However, in 2019, it became clear in our view that multilateral institutions were undergoing a crisis of legitimacy. They needed to rapidly adapt to tackle international challenges, the most important in our view being climate change, and a pivot to Asia in the foreign policies of most countries, including the United States. A pivot, if you prefer, from the Atlantic to the Pacific, that in our view, for Brazil, for Latin America, and even for the United States, should be through Europe. To discuss these problems, CEBRI has established the Multilateralism Program, the main objective being to identify how Brazil could navigate into the global turbulence. To identify prospects of how Brazil and Europe could work together to that common goal, it's a pleasure to have here with us Ambassador to the European Union to Brazil, Inácio Ibanez, our friend, Ambassador to Ireland to Brazil, Sean Hoy, Minister Counsel at the French Embassy in Brazil, Olivier Fontan, Carlos Milani, CEBRI Senior Fellow and Coordinator of the project, and Ana Paula Tostes, Senior Fellow of the Europe Program of CEBRI. Now, I pass the floor to Ambassador Inácio Ibanez, who has been personally invested in strengthening the ties between Brazil and the European Union. Inácio, please, you have the floor.
Many thanks, Pio. I am very honored and pleased to be in this first webinar of our joint project with CEBRI on global political and economic transformation, European contributions, together with my friend and partner, Pio Borges, Professors Carlos Milani and Ana Paula Tosti, and my colleagues, the Irish Ambassador, Sean Hoy, and the French Minister Counselor, Olivier Fontan. With this webinar today, we are making another important step forward in our enduring partnership between the EU delegation and the CEBRI, with a special focus on multilateralism, an area that we both uphold firmly in our respective missions and activities. The launch of this project could not be more timely and topical. It follows the UN General Assembly in New York in September. It happens at the same time of the pre-COP summit, Climate Italy 2021, and ahead of the COP26 and the next G20. In other words, multilateralism is at work more than ever because it is necessary more than ever. The UN continues to be at the center of action, and the EU remains strongly convinced that multilateralism matters because it works and because there is no other way forward to tackle the global challenges we are facing today. And why so? COVID-19, vaccines, post-pandemic recovery, climate action, climate justice, migration, solidarity, peace, security, human rights, name it. The reply is in these self-explanatory words. This is the key message of our strategy that we adopted in February 2021, strengthening the EU contribution to rules-based multilateralism. In this strategy, the EU suggests to make use of all tools at our disposal, including its extensive political, diplomatical, and the financial support to promote a rule-based multilateralism order, promoting multilateral solutions to global challenges. When the strategy was adopted, our High Representative, Josep Borrell, said, and I quote, "Multilateralism matters because it works, but we cannot be multilateralists alone. At a time of growing skepticism, we must demonstrate the benefits and relevance of the multilateral system." End of the quote. Clearly, we know far too well that multilateralism does not always work perfectly, and that is confronted with continuously new situations. Multilateralism needs to be reinvigorated and made it fit for all purposes. For this, the EU needs to leverage its collective strength and continue to deepen partnerships and alliances with its partners at bilateral, regional, and global level, including clearly Brazil, which we see as a key player in multilateral fora. Therefore, today in this first webinar, we want to help nourishing a debate on how we can continue to uphold multilateralism in an ever-changing global environment. On our side, we will bring reflection and experiences of European contributions through the European Union and its member states. But before giving the floor to Carlos, to Professor Milani, I would like to pay a tribute to our partner and friend, Ana Jaguaribe, member of CEBRI Board of Trustees, to whom, with CEBRI, we decided to dedicate this project. Ana was a staunch supporter of a rule-based multilateral system and like-minded with the EU principles and values. If she had been with us today, she would have probably said, I quote, "The political framework of multilateralism is frail and more than ever necessary." End of the quote. We wish to dedicate our joint project and today's discussion to Ana. She deserves it, and this will honor us all. Dear Carlos, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Ibanez. Thanks a lot, José Pio. And it is really an honor to take the lead in this project coordination, because as you all know, this coordination was started, the idea of the project was started by my dear colleague, Ana Jaguaribe, who was a brilliant scholar and an excellent bridge builder between Europe and Brazil, and also between Asia and Brazil. As you know, she was one of the main Brazilian specialists on Chinese political economy, innovation, and also she was very keen on these projects on the development of multilateralism. Today, to kick off the project, which deals with the European contributions to multilateralism, and also with the views coming from other rising powers and emerging regional powers from the global south on the European contributions, we are going to first listen to Ambassador Shen Hoy, and then we are going to listen to Minister Councillor Olivier Fontan, And at the end of the presentations, and my dear colleague from the university and from CEBRI, Ana Paula Tosches, is going to make her comments. I'm going to be the moderator of this session today. I'm very honored and very happy to be here with you all. Ambassador Roy, the floor is yours.
Good morning, Carlos and Jose Pio and my good friends Ignacio and Olivier. It's a great honor for me to address you this morning. And I think it's a particularly important time for Ireland because during the month of September, we were the chair of the UN Security Council. And I think when it comes to multilateralism, the fact that a small country like Ireland, Brazil is 100 times bigger than Ireland, not 101, not 99, it is 100 times bigger than Ireland. But we can, through the democratic process, through the elections to the UN, we can take that seat at the highest table. And we are coming to you now, we are still members of the Security Council. We will join the Security Council with Brazil next year in 2022, and we look forward to working together on a number of issues, especially peacekeeping. But I mean, what I'd like to touch on today is Ireland in the Security Council, Ireland in the European Union, and maybe a small reference at the end when multilateral systems are challenged from within. And I'll talk a little bit about Brexit, because I think you would expect to hear something from me on that. But our tenure in the UN Security Council has been anchored in themes that we've long championed as a country. This include peacekeeping, disarmament, combined with an ambition to tackle the great challenges and the issues of today: climate and security, food systems, Afghanistan, Syria, Iran, and Ethiopia. Last month, the Taoiseach, the Irish Prime Minister, addressed the General Assembly, and he noted that the Hall was calling out alarms on three issues: conflict, COVID, and climate. And if we start with COVID, as we begin to make progress around the world through mass vaccinations, we're acutely aware that the multilateral responses are the only way that we can deal with a global crisis like COVID. We are all interconnected and we are all interdependent. The strongest of us cannot survive alone. We cannot control the virus by only vaccinating our own population. And as we've seen in many countries, we cannot control the virus by simply closing our borders. We must fight it in every corner of the world if we're going to stop the emergence of new variants. And this is something that we can only work through in a multilateral way. But COVID has cast a shadow over the entire world. It has deepened inequality, and it has heightened our sense of interdependence. We cannot succeed in addressing global challenges without a strong and fair multilateral system. And this is why in Ireland we believe so strongly in the importance of the United Nations. COVID forces us to act. You cannot defeat a virus with words alone. We have to operationalize and finance those with the best skills to lead. In Ireland, we've quadrupled our support to the WHO, and we believe that the COVAX initiative is an example of multilateralism at its best. It's the only way to reach the target of a fully vaccinated world by the middle of next year. Our support to global health has already exceeded €200 million. But we also have to admit that the pandemic caught us off guard. If we had made more progress with the Sustainable Development Goals, our societies would have been more resilient, better prepared to weather the storm, and lives would have been spared. We needed this moment to refocus, to build back in a better way that's fairer and greener. We have the SDGs as our blueprint, and we must all invest in a better world. When we think about conflicts, we have our own history on our island that continues to inform us. And when we also look at the risks, and on the Security Council, we are the facilitator for resolution 2231 on the Iran nuclear deal. We've just marked the 25th anniversary of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, and we welcome the recent entry into force of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. We've also observed this year the conflict in Israel, Palestine, Ethiopia, and Afghanistan, amongst others. And these present challenges and the need for strong global leadership to coordinate our responses. The situation of Afghan women and girls has been foremost in our actions last month. When we talk about areas of close alignment with Brazil, one area that certainly comes to mind is peacekeeping. And for more than 6 decades, Irish men and women have served as peacekeepers. Every village on our islands has bid farewell to young men, women and men as they put on the blue beret. And at any one time, there are over 500 Irish personnel serving in UN and EU peacekeeping and crisis management operations. And then for the third one, climate change. This is the single greatest challenge of our generation. I worked personally on climate change in 2004, 2005, when most of the delegates were technical experts from the ministries of environment or meteorology. And we struggled to bring the seriousness of this challenge into the political fora. Much has been achieved over the last 15 years, but we also know that much has yet to be done. We've seen that the most catastrophic impacts disproportionately affect the most vulnerable. And we must deliver on the Paris Agreement when the world gathers at COP26 in Glasgow. The Biden summit in April was an important step, and we call on all those who made commitments then to articulate them in detail at their submissions to the COP. In terms of the European Union, I don't think there's any doubt among the population of Ireland that joining the European Union has vastly accelerated the development of Ireland as a country. We believe and we know that pooling our sovereignty enhances us, it does not diminish us. Abiding by international law brings immeasurable benefits. And we look particularly at the EU as a regulator, setting global standards. The GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, product safety, environmental regulation, and gender equality, also equal pay for work. The EU has been a leader on many of these issues and continues to set a high bar. When we see the EU symbol on goods and services throughout the world, we know that we have a standard that we can trust. It provides us with confidence. And ongoing priorities include artificial intelligence standards and safety in the digital arena, as well as legislation intended to make us a net zero carbon emissions continent by 2050. And maybe just to go on from these standards to talk about Brexit. Brexit was a decision taken by the people of the United Kingdom to leave the European Union. And this was a particular challenge for Ireland because the Good Friday Agreement, the Belfast Agreement, signed in 1998, secured an agreement that there would be no hard border between the north and the south of Ireland. However, Brexit brings this into direct contrast, and the need to avoid that hard border has resulted in the Northern Ireland Protocol, which sees Northern Ireland as both a member of the United Kingdom trading area and of the EU. And this brings special challenges. And one is that with the hard Brexit that the government of Britain has chosen, goods that are entering Northern Ireland from Britain, they are not aligned with the food safety of the European Union, and we must protect the integrity of the single market. So this is something that's ongoing, it's complex, and it's an area where we work and are very closely part of the European Union. Maybe just to close on Brazil, we work very closely with the EU in making a contribution, a bilateral contribution to Brazil during the COVID crisis. And we donated 47,000 doses of essential COVID medication. This would not have been possible to arrange everything if we were not working within the EU. And I know this is only a small part of that cooperation, but it is how a small country through a multilateral structure can bring about bilateral benefits. And this is certainly the case between Ireland and Brazil. So maybe just to close, together we are stronger. And when we work with the United Nations in the agencies here, with the agencies here to address issues of mutual interest within Brazil and on the borders of Brazil. And we're making progress, and I look very much forward to hearing the other speakers as we have much further to go. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Ambassador Sean Hoy. I'll give immediately the floor to Minister Councillor Olivier Fontan. Please.
Thank you very much. Good morning to everybody, and thank you for inviting me to join this webinar, to inaugurate this icon. This is a great honor. And I had a hard time thinking about the subject you imposed on us on economic and political realignments and what it could mean, and that was not so easy, because if I'm not wrong, the notion of realignment is taken from political science and refers more to electoral cycles and political landslide, especially in the US where it was born. So it was not so easy to translate to international policy and especially to multilateralism, which is the topic here today. Because it's I mean, international policy, that's a competitive or cooperative arena with no electoral process to set the agenda. And in multilateralism, one obvious thing is that changes are very slow and very consensual to operate. So how to adapt this notion of realignment to understand international relations, or to talk about multilateralism and the European contribution as it is the aim today? I think we could focus on strong changes which appear in the reality of the world and the distribution of power in the world, and which lead the international political system to adapt to and to integrate this new reality in its governance. And you can have many examples. I think a good bilateral example is China, which struggled for status since the second part of the 20th century, can induce, and we are seeing it, can induce realignments in the region. But to focus on multilateralism, I think that, and I took the year 2015 as a reference, and well, just to stimulate the discussion, because I think this is in the year 2015 we saw strong moves from the international community to integrate how the world works in its new governance. So has 2015 been a landmark year for realigning multilateralism in the 20th century, and what was the EU role in it? I think that we had 3 international conferences in 2015 to realign the international governance. The first one was the Addis Ababa International Conference on Financing for Development. The second one was the approbation in the UNGA in New York of the SDGs, of the Sustainable Development Goals. And the third one was the UNFCCC COP21 in Paris to address the climate change problems. So the first one is obviously an economic realignment. The Addis Ababa Conference on Financing for Development, which took place in July 2015, had an objective to agree on financial and non-financial means to implement the 2030 agenda. The paradox is that it may be the least known of the three conferences of 2015, when I think it's one of the most important because it's a strong reliance on the economic rationale of our time. Because let's say the zeitgeist was to realign the financing of development with the liberalization of the economic agenda since the 80s. And the structure of the document of the Addis Ababa conference, which is called the Addis Ababa Agenda Action with the 4 A's, is quite strong in this way. Because first, we say to developing countries, well, help yourself, because you have to struggle for enabling environment, to mobilize your domestic resources, and to rely on public-private partnership. The second important point in the document is open your market. That's trade, and with trade you get development. And then comes the third point on the document, which is, well, maybe then we can help, and which talks really about overseas development aid in the classical form. So we can see that there was complete reversal of the importance and the priorities of financing development, and which is interesting. For example, if you go to the EU website on the Addis Ababa conference, you can see that, well, the EU is the biggest provider of ODA, which was, I guess, 10 million euros of ODA in this time, but the EU is also promoting the blending of private and public fundings to 100 billion euros, and is also reminding that the trade of the least developed countries is 35 billion euros. So saying, see, well, let's do trade, and we don't have to do so much public finances of development. Then the second moment of 2015 for realigning the world to its reality is, of course, the UNGA meeting, and to prove the SDGs in September in New York, where it's a strong political alignment. The objective was to replace the Millennium Development Goals, and it tried also to capture again the zeitgeist of the moment. Maybe I think that the SDGs are focusing essentially on an economic diagnosis and solutions, which are predominant in the SDGs. That's the main topic of the SDGs. But we have a strong switch from the economic growth, which appears in the MDGs, to the more sustainable aspect of economic development, with the three classical pillars of sustainable development, which are the center of the SDGs. What is interesting is the SDGs, and I think that's a kind of alignment, is that it says that it applies in the same way to developed and developing countries. Of course, developed countries have to take the lead, and developing countries are only supposed to collaborate. But the way that the countries are referring to the UNGA to explain the development of their SDGs is exactly the same, whatever the country. The SDGs also engage strongly with civil society and the public to define themselves. That's maybe also something new in the times. And to end with this conference, I think it also underlines a political new reality, because SDGs, they don't mention political and collective, individual and collective political rights. We only talk in the SDG, we only talk about public policies and economic policies, but not about politics. And then the third point of the year 2015, which is another kind of realignment, is the UNFCCC COP21 conference in Paris, which leads to the adoption of the Paris Agreement. So we have a kind of environmental realignment after the economic one and the political one. And well, the objective is clearly to stop the mutual destruction of our living conditions in peace on this planet. And well, in the Paris Agreement, we have a lot of realignments, small or big. I could talk about it during hours, but I won't bore you with that, and try to focus on three aspects: a tactical one, a strategic one, and a more operational one. The tactical one is that we change completely the approach from Copenhagen to Paris. And in Paris, the approach is that of a bottom-up, is a bottom-up approach to solve the climate crisis. That explains the NDC systems and the ratcheting up mechanism that we have. And this is completely the opposite of the failure of the Copenhagen conference, where a little group of countries try to impose their solution and on the other countries that was rejected, and so the crisis in Copenhagen. The strategic realignment is that at least, maybe too late, but at least the countries or the international community is trying to realign with the reality described by science since 1979 and by the IPCC since the beginning of the 19th, which is that, well, we are in the Anthropocene, the climate is changing, and the human activity and the economy are the main factors of climate change. So at least it's strongly recognized. And then I would like to focus to end my reflections on the operational aspect of the realignments in the Paris Agreement, which is it's a bit technical, but I think it's very important. It's about updating the common but differentiated responsibility, which was a very strong, a very difficult point to resolve in the Paris Agreement. And because till the Paris Agreement, till the year 2015, we were still living in the 70s, which may be good for the music, but not so much for the climate. So I'll try to explain myself. The CBDR, the common but differentiated responsibility, is the application of equity in international, in general international law. Very briefly, it appears in the 70s with the new economic world order mentioned in the Stockholm Conference in 1972. It appears in the GATT clause with the enabling clause in 1979, which allows to have differences in trade for developing countries, for least developed countries. And its first appearance in an agreement is the Montreal Protocol, which mentions the CBDR, and so that's a way to represent the equity and fairness in international relations, and to characterize the historical responsibility first, and also the capacity to pay and the capacity to act of developed countries. And so it's an important concept of the Rio Conference in the document of the Rio Conference in 1992, that's the Article 7, and it also appears in the UNFCCC Convention, that's the Article 3, and it builds a very strong firewall between in the UNFCCC, that's Annex 1 and non-Annex 1, but basically between developed countries and developing countries. In a moment, it builds it in the 90s based on the vision of the world which is of the 70s, and in a world which is absolutely changing. At the beginning of the 90s, the Eastern Bloc is collapsing, so the world, the CBR tries to represent as is already from the past, and we are living with this in the climate regime all along the year 19th and 2000, and in the end, nobody is able to tell what is common and what is different regarding the countries between developed and developing countries. And this was a very difficult problem to resolve in the Paris Agreement. And very briefly, the Paris Agreement is proposing some solutions to realign with the world of the 21st century, Still, we have developed countries and developing countries, but no reference to the old annexes of the convention. And we had, in light of national circumstances, which allows to a lot of difference and differentiations inside the convention. And the NDC system, which is a bottom-up, allows also a lot of differentiation according to the country. So we rely with the world today because we have very individualized approach to climate change according to the countries. So my conclusion briefly is that I think we had in 2015, that's a good example of strong shifts of paradigm. And the EU was really a strong engine in this. Can we say that these realignments were landslides? Well, not completely, because, well, first, that's international relations, so you have no landslides. And for example, if you want to implement the 2013 agenda, we calculated in 2050 that you needed between $5,000 and $7,000 billion at maximum to implement the SDG agenda. The ODA yearly is $150 billion. So we are not at the scale of the changes needed. But if you take the world GDP, that's $140,000 billion. That means that with 1 week of world GDP, you could solve the world SDG agenda. And so we see that the states today are not able to canalize and to use the wealth that the world has created in the last 30 years, and so the realignment is not completely done. Well, at least I think that's a good start for to have another discussion, and I'll stop there. Thank you.
Merci, Olivier. I'll give the floor immediately to my dear colleague, Ana Paula, please.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to participate in this event today. So thank you for your presence here, our honored guests, distinguished guests. So I will address a few thoughts and questions for our conversation in order to open a little bit a few other issues, and then you have space to talk a little bit about what you have already talked. So very briefly to give to Carlos to address questions from the public. I used to say that EU is always a kind of building process, so never ready, never too much solid, never much stable. But we have seen in each crisis that happens in Europe and sometimes in the world, the EU overcoming the crisis, the troubles, and becoming even stronger. So with more supranational competences and taking advantages in form of lessons for the future. And there's a kind of learning process in the EU history, I see. That's something that only knowing very deeply the European integration, the process of European integration, we can see. So as a snapshot picture about a certain moment of the EU history cannot uncover the film, the whole process of the EU construction. And one example of what I'm saying happened last year, in my view, with the approval of the EU Next Generation Recovery Package. It became an instrument, my perception, it became an instrument to look for a way to overcome the COVID-19 crisis by investing in digital and energy transition and making the EU green agenda even stronger. So also, I saw a momentum, a EU momentum in 2020 for the EU reinforcing drives as a multilateral actor with world politics ambitions. because we saw governments around the world started to make substantial moves in similar direction to make compromises regarding the reduction of carbon emissions and move faster toward the green transition. So President Biden has recommitted the US Green New Deal, the American way to nominate the green agenda, and pledged to reduce emission in 50% by 2030. In 2020, the UK introduced the 10-point plan for green industrial revolution, investing various promising technology from electric vehicles to carbon capture and storage projects. So China has committed as well. Meanwhile, that's my point, we in Brazil are in a very distant reality nowadays. So we look forward to a better day, at least regarding the government's position toward the consideration that the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, are in fact more important and even more urgent, each day. However, we have seen in our business sector important commitments toward environment responsibility. But, well, said that, I would like to hear a little bit more from our high-level experts in foreign policy and high-level actors of the foreign policy in our respective countries. For a few things. So Ireland holds a decisive, as already remarked, a decisive position at United Nations nowadays. And in France, we will see elections next year. And also we will have elections next year in Brazil. And so far, it is still very early to say, but we see a possibility to have a change. So in this midterm, what can we still, say we still we can think that it's possible to do in our dialogue. So I'd like to ask a specific question for Ambassador Sean Hoy and another one for the consul, the Minister Consul Olivia. Ambassador Hoy, according to data I have seen from Latin America Trade Council of Ireland, trade between Ireland and Latin America grew exponentially from 2005 and 2017. And in 2017, I saw a report, a Deloitte report on global financial technology, fintech hubs, found that Brazil had more fintech startups than any other country in Latin America. I didn't know that. So while Ireland's business naturally looked to the more traditional markets of the UK, Europe, and the US, what's in your vision, thinking about these midterm perspectives? No, we can how can we continue this good path for business between Brazil and Ireland after the COVID-19 situation, and especially in which sectors do you see potential for dialogues and business growth, especially after the Brexit? Now, considering that talked about the Brexit. Does anything has changed under the post-Brexit scenario in terms of cooperation with Brazil? So I'd like to hear a little bit more about that. And I have another specific question for Minister Consul Olivier Fontaine. The EU Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, delivered her State of the Union speech about 2 weeks ago, right? So one of the important topics she has emphasized was the security agenda for the EU. So I'd like to ask you if you see new opportunities to enhance the cooperation between Brazil and France. I mean, do you see space to stress the bilateral dialogue in security affairs under this new, agenda for 2022? And considering that Brazil and France are important military partners, what about the future? So even after our elections, because in both countries we will have elections in 2022, right, next year, right? So this can change the scenario for opportunities in your view. So I think that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Ana Paula. I will suggest that after these comments by Ana Paula, I give the floor back to Ambassador Roy and then to Olivier Fonton, a Minister Counselor. And then we can bring some questions from the floor. And I have also some comments and questions that I'd like to bring forward. Ambassador, please.
Thank you. And thank you, Ana Paula, for those very wide-ranging questions, but perhaps let me start by saying that we believe there are around 40,000 Brazilians living in Ireland at the minute. It is the 6th largest overseas community in our country. So without any doubt, Ireland is better known in Brazil than at any time in the past. And I frequently meet with people who've traveled to Ireland, and in the English language sector alone, before COVID, we had 16,000 students from Brazil a year traveling to Ireland to work. So this creates lots of relationships, many of them formal, many of them informal. We're seeing a lot of marriages between Brazilians and Irish, and this really came to our attention when we had to deal with COVID, and repatriation of people became quite a challenge. A lot more people here than we anticipated. We have a number of companies here, some of them very large in services. We have in the aircraft leasing alone, one Irish company has just recently signed a contract with GOL for these new technology that is something smaller than a helicopter, but it is a flying car. And I think the technology with GOL is for 350. So that company, Avalon, bought 500 of these aircraft, predicting a new technology, a new way forward, and already 350 of these have been, they will be leased out to companies here in Brazil. So that's at one end. We have other companies working in the very important areas of energy management. And I will speak later this week to the government in Goiás, and they've asked for some examples of some Irish companies, but energy management is something that we all need to focus on, and this is becoming a critical issue for everybody, but especially here in Brazil. And logistics and fintech. Many Brazilians are seeking closer links with Ireland because we are the European hub where many of the multinationals are based, Google, eBay, Apple, and they want to be close in these areas. So in terms of trade, Brazil is our largest partner in South America, and in the Americas, in Latin America, the largest after Mexico, but we see lots of potential, and we're certainly very open to looking at new opportunities for that. And we have a very active Brazilian embassy in Dublin that's also looking into these various areas. Midterm perspectives, I think the first priority is to manage the COVID crisis so that we can start to return to normal, to see aviation opportunities, to see ways that we can travel and meet. I think one thing we've learned all over the last year is that in meetings like this, you can develop new friendships, but you can't make new friendships. And, you know, last week I was able to travel to Rio for the first time in 2 years. And just having those 4 days of meeting with people, it is extremely important. And I hope that we can build on this platform, that, you know, as more and more people are vaccinated and it's safer to travel, that we can look at a new normality. But also, we are very committed in Ireland and within Europe to building back better and greener. And this is a challenge for us all, because it's another form of realignment, that we're moving away from hydrocarbons towards cleaner energy. And the way to do that is an open exchange of the best technologies and the best practice. And that's something that we're also committed to. On the last question on Brexit, nothing has changed in our relationship with Brazil because of Brexit. And I just brought that up because for us, when we talk about realignment, it's an issue, but it's not an issue as far as relationships are with Brazil. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ambassador. Olivier, Mr. Councillor, please.
Merci, Carlos. Just to come back on EU security agenda, yes, that's a very important topic and also complicated item. I guess that would deserve a full seminar by its own. It's progressing. I know we have a very strong discussion in the European Union, but also it's progressing. I mean, operationally, for example, the European Defence Initiative has had a meeting last week in Stockholm to continue to exchange on the operational ways to increase the cooperation between European member states, at least those participating in this initiative. I think that there were 13 member states at this meeting. So that's an ongoing process, but which is gaining strength with EU also gaining in strength in equipment and in operational capacities. Regarding the cooperation on security and between France and Brazil, well, it's a very developed and very strong cooperation we have had for many years now. I guess it's one of the most developed that we have for sure in this region of the world. Essentially which is essentially based currently on the capacity building of in Brazil to build 4 submarines to ensure strategic independence for Brazil, but also to develop a new strategic vision of its responsibility as a power in the world, but and also in its region. These are topics that we are mentioning very often in our bilateral relations, and we are trying to give them the most operational aspects possible. For example, last year, as Ambassador Hoy said already, Brazil will enter the Security Council of the United Nations. So we will consult closely with Brazil to welcome them as permanent member of the Security Council, and to see in what way Brazil can invest and valorize its experience in UN peacekeeping mission, because Brazil has already given a strong effort in peacekeeping mission, and we would like, with Brazil, of course, to use this experience and to project Brazil on new field territory. Of course, if they agree, as a country which is a member of the Security Council. What about the future? Well, the future is, as a philosopher said, well, always moving is the future and difficult to see. So I wouldn't take any guess on your elections, neither our elections, and the consequence they can have. But still, we see that whatever the elections, the relationship between France and Brazil, the bilateral relationships are very strong, very complete, very very complex and deep in economical, strategical, and in security, in culture. So I think it may improve them, but it won't change them, and we won't. It won't diminish the bilateral relations we have between two countries.
Thanks a lot, Olivier and Ambassador, for your replies. I will now bring up some questions from the audience, and I also have one or two comments that I'd like to make to profit from this function that I have as a moderator of this panel. I'd like to start with this nice metaphor that Olivier brought forward about the music of the 70s, which I more or less know, although I was only born in '67. But I think that, and I think it is really important that multilateral agreements and organizations, such as the Paris Accords of 2015, adapt to the new reality. Common responsibilities, but historically differentiated responsibilities is a normative principle of the United Nations Convention on Climate Change, as you know. But I think it was a great landmark, as you pinpointed, that countries like China, Brazil, in 2015 accepted, also showing solidarity towards other southern nations, that they could and they should increase their responsibilities in terms of climate change negotiations. I think that this music of the 70s, in the case of climate change, has adapted to the music of the year of current music. I mean, contemporary times. I guess that in the case of security, the music is still playing songs of the 1940s and 50s, right? And perhaps I'd like to hear from you and from Ambassador Hoy if and when we are going to adapt the music of the Security Council to what is playing currently. I think that is another kind of music that should be adapted, perhaps. That's just based on your nice metaphor. I'd like to amplify the metaphor to the field of security. In the field of security, we have a question from Mariana Albuquerque, and she asks, and this goes for both the ambassador and the minister counselor, how the European countries organize themselves inside the Security Council? How is the dynamic between a permanent member, such as France, and a non-permanent member, such as Ireland? If you could explain a little bit on that. And then after that, perhaps I can bring about some other questions and also other comments on the climate agreement from 2015, which I think, and I agree with Olivier Fontan, was a landmark in multilateral climate negotiations. Ambassador, Minister Counselor, if you'd like to comment and respond, please.
Thank you very much, Carlos. I mean, on the issue within the Security Council, Ireland and France are the only two European countries at the moment on the council. And we ran our campaign on an open agenda. We set out our priorities, and those are the basis for our election, and we stick to those. But of course, getting agreements through the Security Council is about building those relationships, and our relationship clearly with France is very important and very strong. And it's certainly informed by the fact that we're both members of the European Union. On security, I think this is probably a better question for Olivier, but I think one area that we really have to think about is cybersecurity. And this is a new challenge for us all, and it's a growing challenge. And again, it comes down to standards and setting frameworks that protect us. So those are my few comments on those questions.
Olivier Fontan.
Yes, regarding the Security Council and the reform of the Security Council, well, France is supporting since a long time now reform of the Security Council of the United Nations that should increase its authority and better its representativity, still preserving its capacity for action. So France is in favor of enlarging the Security Council for permanent members and for non-permanent members. And we are absolutely supporting the enlargement of the Security Council for permanent members to the G4, that is Germany, Brazil, India, and Japan, and to better representation of African countries in the Security Council. And by the way, inside the Security Council reform we are pushing, we also launched in 2013 an initiative to have an agreement for the permanent members of the Security Council not to use their veto rights in case of mass casualty, mass atrocities, so to preserve the capacity of the Security Council to put an end to situation, including mass atrocities in the world.
Would you have, Olivier, any comment on the dialogue between France and Ireland, the question that Mariana Albuquerque had posed beforehand?
Well, I know that I don't know the specific case for the incoming year, but I know that each time that we have new non-permanent members in the Security Council, we have a strong approach with the new non-permanent members to share our understanding of the main topics of the Security Council, and especially when these are members of the European Union, to try to be on the same line is too strong, but want to strongly coordinate our position so that the EU members of the Security Council can talk with if not one voice, at least the same voice.
Thanks, Olivier. I think Ambassador Inácio Ibáñez would like to make a comment on that specific issue. Please, Ambassador.
Thank you, Carlos, and thank you, of course, to the colleagues who are doing an excellent presentation of what they do. But if I may, also using a little bit of my own experience, as you know, I'm a national diplomat now working for the EU, and I had for some time the responsibilities in Spain. And in 2014, we were elected member of the Security Council, and we ran in the Security Council, of course, as a non-permanent member in 2015, 2016. In our case, I must say that the campaign that we had, and this depends, of course, on the member states. In our case, the campaign was very much based on being an EU member. It was something strong, probably because our big partner, apart from New Zealand, and at the end we went in the Security Council with New Zealand. The other country which was applying for the post was Turkey. As you know, Turkey is a candidate, quite far at this time, but is a candidate, not a member of the EU. So for us, for Spain at this time, to be member of EU was an important element. I must confess that one of the elements, we had others, of course, the very good relation we have with many Latin American countries, including Brazil, also a very good presence in Africa. But I would say that being an EU member was a good and a very positive element for us to be elected in the Security Council. And when we arrived there to the Security Council, one of the things that we did with the rest of the member states was really to create this idea that, of course, Spain was in the Security Council, not the EU. This is clear, and especially with France, who is a permanent member, but that the coordination of our positions before going to discuss and after discussing something in the Security Council was always to come back to the EU, because we are a union, and we have to defend, of course, our national position, but also the position of the EU. true. And I must say that we created some rules which are still valid of the members of the Security Council, especially the non-permanent members of the Security Council, to report and to work. And I think, and I'm seeing and following this issue, and we do it more and more, the coordination, I would say, of the EU inside the Security Council is increasing day by day, because of course we are getting also in the international field more and more coordination among ourselves. Still, the foreign policy is a policy which is designed by unanimity of the members, but also we have created the EIS, we have created the external service, and this makes that at the end the role that we do in the UN as a whole, but very particularly the Security Council, is more and more. And I must say that when we were there, Spain was there, we had 2 permanent members because the UK was still a member of the EU. Now we only count with a permanent member, which is France, but I'm sure that now France, now Ireland, they're also doing this work, the work of informing the other member states and also promoting and defending the EU positions inside the Security Council. And I must say that is a process that is working very well. We are very happy and very respectful of the leadership that France is having, and touching a little bit what Olivier has saying about the reform. France, for example, presented several ideas on reforming the Security Council, and there is one which was very supported by the EU, was to limit the use of the veto, especially whenever you are discussing about things which are, and we were at this time thinking mainly about the Syrian crisis, and France was having the veto, as they do have the veto. They were proposing to limit the use of veto when you have situations like the one we have living in Syria. So I think the EU is more and more strong in the Security Council, thanks to France as a permanent member, but also thanks to the different member states who participate there as non-permanent. And now we are lucky to have Ireland on this position. Thank you, Carlos.
Gracias, Embajador. I'd like to make a final question, a final comment coming to the perhaps 2 multilateral regimes in which the European Union and European countries have given enormous contributions in the last 50 years, and in the case of climate change more recently, which is exactly climate change and human rights. I'll start with human rights. Last year, the first phase of this project, we had started with the support of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation. We were also discussing realignments and the reshaping of multilateral organizations under the coordination of our dear Ana Jaguaribe. We had reached some conclusions about the need in the field of human rights for multilateral organizations to encompass the diversity of the world. And the idea that, I mean, of course, this is extremely tricky. It can be a trap politically and culturally, because we know that in the case of Latin America, we don't have many issues. Latin American countries have signed the majority, I mean, more than 95% of international human rights agreements. I mean, Brazil, Mexico, Argentina, Uruguay, Chile, they are champions of these within this multilateral regime. Well, Brazil used to be a champion. Now it's not a champion anymore, but I hope this is just going to be a historical parenthesis, and that we can reclaim this status very, very soon. But when you take some African countries and when you take Asian countries and not irrelevant countries in Asia, the behavior within this multilateral regime varies a great deal. And then my first question concerning this specific multilateral regime, which is very important with European contributions, is how flexible and how encompassing, culturally speaking, could Europe in general, the European Union in general, be in terms to adapt and to accept new visions on democracy, new visions on human rights, new visions on freedom that may stem from these other regions of the world? That is my first question. And the second question has to deal with the climate change regime. And I think that it was a great move when in Paris, in the Paris Accords of 2015, when we moved to the nationally determined contributions, to the NDCs. The question is, as Nicholas Stern, the great British economist, said in 2006, climate change is the greatest market failure in the world, right? He stated that in his Bible with more than 300 pages, reading from the economic perspective, the international global problem of climate change. And the multilateral climate regime has very few teeth concerning business. I mean, business and corporations are asked on a voluntary basis to adhere and to follow rules and to adapt to these new rules. And when it comes to some segments of the market, like fossil fuel industry, how many teeth, in your opinion, should this multilateral climate agreements have in order to promote the change that is expected, the change that is needed if we want to keep the climate livable for humankind? If you could react to those two comments, questions, then we can wrap up the session around that. Ambassador, and then Minister Counselor, please.
Thank you very much, Carlos. They're also very broad questions, but I think on human rights, I mean, there is a bottom line, and we can't be flexible on human rights so that we have various national interpretations. But at the same time, you know, new visions on democracy, these are issues. I mean, we're very directly involved with the Human Rights Council in Geneva. We have an active presence there. But, you know, let's talk about Afghanistan. You know, we've taken a very strong stance on women and girls and their education. And I don't think that is an issue you can compromise because there's a cultural change. So I think there has to be standards, and they have to be adhered to. And, you know, the special representative on human rights was a former foreign in the European Union, was a former foreign minister in Ireland. And, you know, I know his views, and he's very strong on these. On climate change, I think the issue of the private sector is important, but the way that you change business is not always by directives from multilateral structures. I think shareholders have a real voice, and the shareholders, I know, within some of the oil and gas industries are becoming very active. And I'm hearing this from many other European countries. Ireland is not a producer of either oil or gas, but from other countries, it is the shareholders and the young people that are pushing for those changes. And we're seeing those changes coming from within. So I think that's more powerful because it's more sustainable, and it can't be reversed by a political change. And I think that's a very positive thing. I remember certainly younger people were more likely to recycle things in Ireland 15 years ago than older people. And they created that bottom-up pressure. And I think young people as shareholders are putting pressure on those companies, and we're seeing results. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Ambassador. Olivier de Fontan, please.
Yes, thank you, Carlos. Well, I would, on human rights, I would completely align or realign on Ambassador Hall's expression. I mean, that's very clear that you can't compromise on human rights. And then I would, if we had the time, I would return you the question, asking to be more specific. What kind of new democracy is this? What kind of human rights? I mean, I know democracy, I know human rights, but different versions I can see. In a way, you can argue that you have, the first, second, and third generation of human rights, and some countries are applying some of them more than the others. And this is already, you have already a kind of room for maneuver and evoluting the human rights concept. But basically, I would strictly follow what Ambassador Hoy has said. On climate change, he's also right. Of course, the business is one of the main. Climate change is the result of our economic model since 2 centuries. So business is absolutely at the center and is absolutely key in stopping climate change or limiting the damages. So yes, the shareholders are one part, and you are talking about the things that climate change agreements are lacking, which is the case for almost all environmental agreements, which have less teeth than the others. But still, regarding the leverage we can have, one other question is trade. Because, and that's what's happening today, for example, in Europe, you realize that many people are more cautious regarding the origins of the products that they are buying, be it inside Europe or outside Europe, and they are more questioning about the value chain and the environmental conditions of their production, but also the social and human rights production. So I think that combined with strong pressure inside the business by shareholders, we have too strong leverage to accelerate the action on climate change.
Thanks a lot, Ambassador. Thanks a lot, Mr. Counselor. I will now open the floor to Ambassador Inácio Ibáñez and José Pio Borges, if they want to make some final comments.
Well, I would just like to thank Ambassador Sean Hoy and Minister Council Olivier Fontaine for their participation. I already did that to Inácio, and I do now to you. Whenever you come to Rio, I would very much like you to visit CEBRI and, if possible, have lunch with us there and some of the board members. So I hope you can come soon. And thank you very much for participating. Thank you, Ana Paula and Carlos Milani, for coordinating this first encounter. And I hope we, through our work in this series of discussions that we are having, we can produce something that will, help in strengthening the commitment to multilateralism from both Europe and Brazil. Inácio, please.
Thank you very much, José Pio. Thank you for the invitation, which is really, as we are slowly going to a kind of normality that we are traveling more and more. Of course, it will be a pleasure to join you there and to enjoy what you are offering to us. Really, I think that today the event has been excellent. Thank you very much, Ana Paula, Carlos, and of course my colleagues Sean and Olivier. You've done an excellent work, and it's something which I really must say that I always see when I have the possibility to listen to Brazilians and Europeans discussing about issues. Is from one side, I would say the proximity that we have, how really the values we defend are the same, but also the need more and more to exchange, to have dialogue, because I think in the case looking from the EU, Brazil, you are a very important partner for us, you are a strategic partner for us, but also you are a partner who has relation with many other parts of the world, and for us is always very enriching to see first how you see us, and Ana Paula has done, I would say, an excellent presentation of this EU process that sometimes you understand better us after some of the crises, when we grow up and we really change and we do, I would say, better things looking to the future, but also for us really to work more with the Brazilians to understand better a world which is changing. And I think Olivier, referring to the music, but not only to the music, has been showing to us how the world has changed from the 70s. I must confess that also, even I was young at the time, but I like very much the music of the 70s. But there are other things in which we are adapting. We are, of course, looking much more to climate change, which is really a challenge for us Europeans. I think it's also a challenge for Brazilians, but also a challenge where it can also bring a lot of opportunities. And Brazil is a very good example of that. Really, you are a green country, a country which can offer a lot, has already offered a lot, I would say, but can even offer more looking to the future. And for us to have you as partner is very important. And I think this kind of discussion, this kind of putting together what we are doing in the multilateral level and hoping to doing more and more things together is an excellent opportunity. So thank you, CEBRI, for this opportunity you are giving to us. And of course, we are going to follow the line that Anna pointed to us, and we are going to be very happy to reinforce this cooperation through this particular project, which is very challenging and very dear to us. So thank you very much, all of you.
Thank you. Thank you, Olivier. Thank you, Ambassador, Ana Paula, Carlos.